Hey guys, I know we're all focused on post-Infinite Forbidden format at this point, but you know what, for now, let's just focus on the events post-Battles of Legend Terminal Revenge and see how the tier list of the best decks and rogue decks are looking like based on data using the WCQ tops as well as some Dueling Book data as well, and I'll also try to make some commentary in terms of the decks compared to post-Infinite Forbidden. As always, definitely go check out those discount codes for Yu-Gi-Oh! Singles as well as sleeves. I also want to highlight that Sleeve Chief is a new sponsor of mine, and so they do have a little special going on in terms of their sales for sleeves, so definitely go check that out. You can use code AKUNO5 for additional 5% off there. And as always, definitely a shout out to YGOProduct.com and Renren as well as Ivan in keeping up with all of these meta-relevant tops. And so let's just get started with the tier list for this month. Obviously, no surprise, Snake Eye comes out on top yet again with its dominance in the current format. Of course, post-Infinite Forbidden, they're going to get the Fiendsmith stuff that will also supplement them even further. Of course, I have been hearing some people saying that, you know what, they'd rather just play Pure with, allocating those Fiendsmith slots for just hand traps instead. So that's to be seen, of course, post NAWCQ, EU, WCQ, but nonetheless, it is, unless a ban list comes before those events, obviously this is still going to be the best deck by far, but you also have Tenpai Dragons, which did have a disappointing showing at YCS Indianapolis, but in the recent WCQs they have at least held their own in terms of having a decent chunk of the tops. And of course, this is another deck that post Infinite Forbidden will get just better because they're going to get their own popular basically, and so they're going to be stronger, going second, going first. So definitely something to watch out for in the next format as well. Yubel is of course one of the decks that have experienced a significant improvement post Battles of Legend Terminal Revenge because of Phantom Yubel that's come out. Obviously that card can actually supplement a lot of different strategies too, but it is maximized in Yubel in itself. And I actually recently did a video surveying the players that play Yubel, so you can definitely go check that out in terms of the key strengths, key weaknesses of this deck, and any hand traps and board breakers that are good to side against. So this is a deck that is it has a pretty strong end board nowadays with Savage and Barone being banned. This is one of the few decks that can very spit out that Omni Negate and their new rank 10 Varudras, or however you pronounce it, and they have access to like the Unchained stuff. And speaking of Unchained, post Infinite Forbidden, then this is another one with Fiendsmiths will really supplement this deck quite well. So this is one of the decks that I think a lot of players have high hopes for and will be in tier 1 at that point as well. And then you have like the Fire King version of Snake Eye. Really nothing too much to say. It really is pretty much just Snake Eye. They have some more interesting, I guess, interactions to deal with in terms of like the Kyrian pops, but really it also comes at the cost of playing some bricks. Moving to tier 2, we do have Brandon Despia. I think this is very well deserved in the top of the tier 2 section because as you would have seen in some of the nationals, this was slightly before Battles of Legend, but it was doing very well in terms of either winning the event or very close to winning the event. Gimmick Lock, very strong, and even against something like Snake Eye can be pretty strong if they get to go first at least. And so I think post Infinite Forbidden, again, this kind of depends on if the ban list does come out because Sanctifier is bound to get banned. At the same time, you do have Light and Darkness Dragon, the new version coming out in Infinite Forbidden, and that is something that Branded can play. It's a little bit trickier to bring out. I mean, I think you would have to maybe go through Branded Banishment and bring that out essentially, but you know what, it serves as an Omni Negate, which Branded has kind of for the most part really lacked aside from that pre-year where people were playing Dragoon because of Keshira. But very strong deck even post ban list, I would assume. Voiceless Voice, this is something that has fallen back lately. I mean, I was also looking through deck lists. I'm not really sure how many are playing the branded version anymore, and even when they are playing the branded version, certainly they actually were not playing Dragon anymore anyways, so that kind of lock part is gone, it seems, for the most part. So I think it's a very consistent deck, very strong going first, and very reliable, so I do think there's some hope there, but obviously not doing as well lately. Next, we have Melodious. This is a deck that has actually consistently done quite well since its wave of support in Legacy Destruction, which is something that is actually pretty impressive because a lot of times you have decks where they do well at the start because of kind of like the quote-unquote initial hype, essentially. Like, for example, whether it's like a set release or let's say like banless releases, like let's say Orcus, it did get some tops here and there after Harp Horror got unbanned, but at the same time, really could just completely disappeared since then, right? So kind of depends on popularity, but this has shown to be quite strong. I've also did a recent video surveying Melodious players in terms of their strengths and weaknesses and some of the good side tech cards, so that is something you can check out. I do assume that, obviously post Infinite Forbidden, Dark Ruler is going to be quite popular, and that was one of the cards, along with Droplet and even Super Poly, that are quite strong against Melodious, so that is something that I'm sure will take a consideration in the next format as well. So next we have Ritual Beast, which is another deck that got a significant improvement post Battles of Legend because of the new support that just came out, which has been quite some time since its last wave of release. So this deck, it did actually get some decent amount of tops, both at the WCQ level as well as the regional level. It's kind of an interesting one. I mean, they take like honestly 20 minutes to combo, and their end board I didn't feel was as impressive, although Protos can definitely be really strong if you pull that off. This one, I'm curious to see what will happen post Infinite Forbidden, because aside from the fact that, you know, let's say this initial wave of hype that might potentially be a factor in terms of, you know, the amount of play that it's seeing right now, but also the new hand trap that's coming out, the Pearlia, presumably was quite strong against Ritual Beast because they do tend to actually normal summon quite a lot, additional normal summons as well from the hand. So I think that is something that could potentially affect it depending on how often that hand trap will actually get played. Then you have Salamangreat. This deck has actually been doing quite well, even in like the last month alone at the very least. It has nothing to do with Battles of Legend. I mean, really just fire decks in general, with Promethean Princess being very strong for any kind of fire deck, has been putting up numbers. This deck has access to a lot of you know, rank 4 plays, OTK plays, like that have multiple back row interruptions. So I think it's actually quite solid. Then you have Runic Stun. This is not really great to see. Runic in general, I was hoping would actually start getting some hits on the balance, aside from they like semi-limited Fountain, which really didn't do that much. A lot of Runic decks were playing 2 Fountain anyway to begin with. And so of course, post Infinite Forbidden, there's also like the Whitewood stuff I know apparently goes well with Runic stuff. So that is something to keep in mind. Hopefully, I mean, I do understand why there's a rise in Sun decks the last few months, because Snake Eye has been so dominant, and Runic Sun provides kind of a cheap way to hang in the meta. It's not fun. Of course, there's a lot of floodgates that are quite problematic. Konami has started to hit them lately, which is kind of a good sign. So curious to see how they will go towards hitting any kind of stun versions. So next we have Spright, which actually recently won, I believe, the South American WCQ. It did feature the new Ice Barrier cards. I mean, it only involves 2 Ice Barrier cards, so I'm not going to call it Ice Barrier Spright or anything. It does allow for an easier line to Totally Awesome again, kind of reminiscent of the old days with like Ronin Tonin. Of course, not nearly as good because we don't have Spright Elf anymore, but being able to shoot out Toad is pretty nice as an Omni Negate. And then they still have access to the Melfi stuff, because, you know, with the Melfi stuff, the good part of that is that you don't have to waste like a gigantic Spright summon on a particular monster. As long as you can go into a rank 2 play, you always have access to the Melfi stuff, which is kind of nice. And this deck has a lot of flex spots for hand traps, which is kind of a must nowadays for meta decks. And not only that, it's actually quite solid going second as well, in terms of they do have Zeus line of play, and also the Mosquito OTK, which is incredibly strong, but it is actually quite solid. So moving on to kind of like a rogue tier, I mean, Labrynth is still quite solid, right? It was topping the WCQ and regional levels. And of course, post Infinite Forbidden, Fiendsmith is another one that's going to be quite nice for Labrynth, because not only do they, I mean, they're fiends, then not only do they pair well with Fiendsmith, but they already pair well with the Unchained stuff, which essentially means, you know, any kind of access to Beatrice is kind of nice for Labrynth when they want to get something like Transaction Rollback into the Graven set. So I do think that there's definitely some potential there post Infinite Forbidden. You also have Pearly. This one, I mean, it hasn't done too well, honestly, even with like Delicious going to 2. It hasn't done too much damage to the meta. In post Infinite Forbidden, I don't know if anything really changes. I was watching Pax tier list post Infinite Forbidden. I know he was kind of joking around with like Pearly with like Fiendsmith stuff, because you can like discard the lore or whatever. But I mean, I don't know. If you play Pearly, definitely let me know if you think anything really changes for this deck post that format. You also have Chimera, which has been doing quite well, actually. It's at least at like a rogue relative standard, because you have some new illusion stuff, which is actually the new Diabell Star, or whatever it is, that's like a walking anti-spell, is actually quite strong for a number of reasons, aside from having to set these spell and traps, which Chimera, since its release, has technically evenly matched, was kind of like a big kryptonite for that deck, because they don't have like any kind of like an Omni Negate, at least at that point. And so having to set it, which essentially kills evenly, and then let's say something like Droplets, which has been very popular lately, if you have to set that, and also like Super Poly, which technically was never great against Chimera anyways, ironically enough, but you know, those kind of quick plays where you have to set it, now you just can't use it that same turn. So I think Chimera's actually been quite solid. You've seen it with Branded, and now lately you've also seen it with Melodious stuff. So I think, and maybe even with Fiendsmith stuff post Infinite Forbidden. So I think there's it's actually a very solid rogue choice. Kashira, this actually the shifter decks like Cashier, Flunder has taken a step back in terms of top cut representation lately. Cashier, of course, is more so popular as an engine now, with like whether it's Snake Eyes or whatever other deck, just like with like Unicorn, like Birth. Fenrir is also a pretty strong card. Will that actually get hit on the ban list? I kind of given up hope at this point, so I think you know, as long as Arise Heart doesn't come back, I think it's okay. But Cashier Birth is still really strong card. But you know what? It hasn't been too well lately. You also have Rika, which has been doing really well, of course, in Europe, clearly, as always. So really good. I mean, I suspect again with that new hand trap coming out in Infinite Forbidden, Rika does tend to summon a lot from the hand. I would assume it would affect them. Now definitely let me know as well if you do play Rika. I don't really know too much about this deck to be able to comment on it post Infinite Forbidden. So next we have Tearlaments, which kind of a common theme post Infinite Forbidden, Fiendsmith stuff, which goes well with a lot of different decks, and Tearlaments is a deck that already made Beatrice to begin with because they like sending things to the grave. The Fiendsmith stuff can only presumably help with that. One of the weaknesses with Tearlaments, kind of similar to the lines of branded Despia, is that they have a very high engine count in the main, which makes it very hard to put in like flexible, you know, hand traps, board breakers in the main deck at the very least. So that's kind of like the downside of a deck like this. But you know what, going first, I'm sure it's still pretty strong even with the Millers being banned. I do find their while the consistency has taken a hit, their kind of ceiling is still pretty good, at least going first. Next, you have kind of like pure Unchain. Nowadays, you're obviously seeing Unchain more so with like Yubel, maybe even Labrynth. But you know what? The pure one has still actually held its ground this entire time post the last ban list. And you know, with Fiendsmith stuff coming out, obviously it can only get better as well. So definitely keep an eye on that one. And then Flunder, I kind of spoke to this in terms of like the Cashier section, like the shifter decks just aren't doing too well nowadays. Flunder is another one actually with that new hand trap coming out. Finally, a hand trap that can actually affect Flunder quite a lot because they do normal summon a lot from the hand, obviously. So your opponent is going to be able to plus quite a lot if they resolve that. So maybe it actually decreases play of Flunder even more at that point. So then we have Mannadium, hasn't been doing too well, has still some tops though, which perhaps maybe some would argue is impressive considering the Barone ban, for example. Triff, actually I was at the Niagara Falls regional like a week ago, he actually topped that regional with like Mannadium, Snake Eye featuring Sky Striker cards, so again, really impressive. I think post Infinite Forbidden though, Droll is going to be pretty popular because of the Fiendsmith stuff in particular, and Droll has always been, of course, very strong against something like Mannadium, so maybe it doesn't end up being too well, but Mannadium combined with, let's say, sometimes Centurion stuff and going like Calamity Lock, really strong nonetheless. Alright guys, so that was it for the tier list post Battles of Legend Terminal Revenge, along with some thoughts in terms of post Infinite Forbidden. So definitely let me know what your thoughts are in terms of, you know, the upcoming format. You know, are you looking forward to it? Do you prefer a balance to come before or after? Really, I'm sure a lot of people are probably hoping for some kind of change with Snake Eye at the very least, but nonetheless, huge thanks to all of you for watching. Big thanks to my patrons and sponsors as always, and well, take care guys.